if we don't acknowledge that they have these extremely high intellects and they're being asked to rein it in, so you've got this racehorse that's locked in a stall all the time. That is so damaging to who they are as a human being and what their potential is.
Welcome to Tilt Parenting, a podcast featuring interviews and conversations aimed at inspiring, informing, and supporting parents raising differently wired kids. And I just have to say, welcome to a new decade. This is the first episode not only of the year, but the first episode of the 2020s. I'm going to have to get used to saying that, but I kind of like it. I'm your host, Debbie Reber, and this week I am talking with Dr. Melanie Hayes, an expert in gifted education and the founder of Big Minds, a microschool designed for twice exceptional learners. Dr. Hayes holds a master's in gifted education, a doctorate in educational leadership with a focus on twice exceptionality, and is also the parent of 2 differently wired children herself. In our conversation, Melanie shares her story of going from teacher to homeschooling parent to doctorate to school founder. We also discuss how the educational model and philosophy of Big Minds seeks to support the intellectual, social, and emotional well-being of 2E students. And Melanie also shares some really practical and doable strategies for how these needs can be met in traditional educational settings. As you'll hear, Melanie's insights are profound. They're rooted in professional, academic, and personal experience, and her passion for supporting the 2E population runs deep. I hope you enjoy our conversation. And now let's get to the interview. Here is my conversation with Dr. Melanie Hayes. Hey, Melanie, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, Debbie, thanks so much for having me on your podcast.
I'm looking forward to this, especially having finally gotten a chance to meet you in person at Bridges 2E Symposium, I guess last month. And I'm just excited to learn more about your work and clue listeners into your school. And I guess as a way to get started, maybe just take a few minutes to introduce yourself. I've already read your official bio, but tell us a little bit about how you introduce yourself and what you do.
Sure. Well, also, I just want to tell you I'm a mutual fan of both Differently Wired and of the Tilt podcast. I think you're doing some really amazing support for everybody who has differently wired kids around the world. So thank you for that.
Oh, thank you.
And, I think I got started the way most of us do. I have 2 neurodivergent children. I had twins at 41, and I was a public school teacher at the time. So I took time off after they were born and stayed home with them. And then we all went back to school happily for kindergarten. And my kids who are 18 now jokingly say they're kindergarten dropouts because we only made it through about halfway through kindergarten. And it was actually at the time pretty devastating for me because I had this career as a teacher and I thought my kids would do great. We were in a really great school, one of the distinguished schools in a very sought-after community in California. And my daughter was severely bullied, and my son just completely shut down. What happened with my son was he was doing 5th grade math and read at a 12th grade level in kindergarten, and they refused to do any kind of acceleration. They said to me, well, if he's doing 5th grade math in kindergarten, what are we going to do next year? Because we only go to 6th grade. So I realized I was going to have to do something drastic. And so I pulled them from school and quit my job and stayed home homeschooling. And that was kind of a shock because I tried to do sort of school at home, and that didn't work. And then as we went along, we found out that they were both considered to be twice exceptional children, both my kids, and I have their permission to talk about them. But both of them have anxiety disorder. My son also has something called prosopagnosia, which is face blindness. My daughter is a stealth dyslexic, so she has dysgraphia, dyscalculia, and dyslexia, which is a trifecta of trouble for school. And my son also had a lot of OCD behaviors because of the intense stress of school. So that's what got us started. And when my daughter was about 9 years old, she sat me down. This is just my daughter in a nutshell, and said, Mom, I need to see at least 4 friends 4 days per week. So That's when I decided to start a little school out of my home. And that's how Big Minds was born. So it started out as a small homeschool school where I invited other neurodivergent kids to come in and do schooling with me at home. And then I realized pretty quickly that the whole system isn't going to work for 2E kids. So I decided, well, it is kind of a social construct. So why am I trying to adhere to something that really is an imaginary thing that we all buy into, but doesn't have to be that way? So I threw it all away and I started from scratch. I ended up going back and getting a doctorate because I realized if I was going to try to roll this out to the public, I would have to have the credentials to be taken seriously. And so that's what I've done. So the lab school turned into Big Minds, which is now our flagship school is in its 4th year, and we're opening a second campus next fall and hopefully a campus a year after that. So just really hoping to roll this model out and help people to understand that you can do something radically different in education that's designed to help our kids be successful rather than set them up for failure.
Wow, what a story. And, I'm always fascinated by educators who go through this journey. I recently spoke at a parent event in Seattle, and there was a parent sitting on the stage with me, and I recognized him as a teacher from a private school for gifted kids. And now he's at home with his twice exceptional kids. And I just find that transition fascinating if you've been teaching, because you must have had neurodivergent students in your classroom before you.
Oh, yeah.
And yeah, I'm just wondering, what was that like for you?
It was so interesting because I had a reputation for being the teacher that all the atypical kids liked, right? So I started to get a reputation where people, I worked with gifted kids, but people who had these differently wired kids started asking for me too. And I'm sure I was a nightmare to my principal because at one time I remember I had no desks in my room. I just had picnic tables with computers. And back then computers were pretty new in the school, but I got some donated. We had a bunch of beanbag chairs and all these art stations. And so when I look back on it now, I even had sort of the Big Minds mindset back then. I just had created it in my classroom. And so I was already a little bit outside the box as a public school teacher. But I have to tell you, it really shook me to the core to have to pull my kids from school because there was so much around my life that was attached to being a teacher.
Yeah, I bet. I can imagine just, in terms of, I don't know about existential crisis, but identity crisis and what does this mean? And yeah, that's a huge transition. And then you said that it didn't work initially, that homeschooling, how soon you pulled them out in kindergarten, how soon did you realize this model as isn't working, and why wasn't it working?
Well, I think, I tried to do school at home, let's do the workbooks. Let's, I was a trained professional. I could pull curriculum and put together lesson plans in my sleep. And so I was trying to do that with my kids. And I did invite some other people to come in for like some art classes and history classes and things like that so that my kids would have companions in the classroom. But it was still that control and compliance model where here I am the teacher. I'm presenting the knowledge that you need to know. I'm going to teach you how to learn this knowledge, and then you're going to demonstrate in some way that you know that knowledge. And I'm not going to say I was a really traditional teacher before that. If you wanted to demonstrate your knowledge in some other way, I remember when I taught 5th grade, we did a unit on U.S. history, and I basically wrote down everything they had to demonstrate that they knew from the unit, and then they could come up with any way they wanted to do it. And I had some really wonderful, exciting projects. I mean, everything from a play to a video to, they did all kinds of things to demonstrate their knowledge. So it wasn't like I was this rigid, adhere to traditional linear sequential model type teacher anyway. But even that for 2E kids is too much. Like there is still too much control and compliance around how, when, and what they learn. And so I had to quickly let go of that and say, okay, let me sort of switch to a strengths-based model. How can I put an enriched environment around you where you can see what you don't already know? Because, a lot of 2E kids get very fixated on a subject and explore it in depth for a very long time and become a subject matter expert, but they only know what they know. And so, I want to make sure I exposed them to lots of things so that they could find out what their next passion or interest might be. So as I went through that, I started to realize that the way we teach just doesn't work with that. If we are trying to move them through a preset curriculum, it closes all these other doors that might be connected to the thing that they're meant to do in the world.
Absolutely. Yeah, I went through a similar just re-education of myself or reframing. I think it probably took me a lot longer than it took you to realize that I needed to do homeschooling with my son in a different way. But you talked about recognizing that these kids need something radically different and that that's what you're doing through your school. So can you just maybe tell us about the model of your school and kind of walk us through how it's designed and how it is radically different from what a traditional educational model would offer?
Sure. So Big Minds is first and foremost an attachment model, which means we are very much about the relationship. Our teachers work really hard to build trusting and caring relationships with our kids because many of them come to us already traumatized from school, traumatized from experiences with teachers. And so that's our primary goal, is for them to feel safe and cared for and respected. And then it's a strengths-based model. So we're always looking at what are their strengths first. We're not looking at the deficits. It's not that we don't recognize that they're there, but for example, if you have someone in who has dysgraphia and fine motor skills issues and their whole school career has been, focused on trying to get them to do better at handwriting, they've missed out on all the chance to do the things that they do the best. And so we're just going to go around that roadblock. We're going to either use technology or we'll find some other way for them to demonstrate their knowledge. So the strengths-based, it's not about setting a curriculum for these kids. Certainly, if we did it sort of the back end and looked at the Common Core curriculum, we could attach what they're learning to that curriculum. But we find that really restrictive because, 2E kids, if they're really fascinated and interested in something, they can blow through a year's worth of curriculum in like a month or two. I've seen kids who suddenly found out about calculus who loved math and went through a whole calculus curriculum in 2 months. So it's kind of hard to try to set a year-long curriculum when each child has this both asynchronous development and the capacity to learn stuff at such a rapid acceleration. So we don't have a set curriculum that way. The way we do it is each of the teachers is in a room. So the Big Minds kind of looks more like a home environment. We have computers on tabletops and, there's tabletops in the art room, but there's not desks and chairs in rooms in a typical setup like a classroom. Lots of soft furniture and couches, and the whole school. I designed it from, there's a book called The Third Teacher about how important the environment is for learning. So I thought about what do our kids need in a sensory environment. So the whole interior of Big Minds is sort of a sensory soothing environment. And there's quiet places where kids can tuck away and read or meditate or do yoga or whatever it is they want to do to relax. And then, there's like a computer room and a science room and a art room and a history room and a library and things like that. But the kids can move about the school at will. They can work on whatever it is they want to work on. We are there to encourage and facilitate and, like I say, provide an enriched environment. And then part of the enriched environment is our school is broken into 2 set times. In the morning is called investigation time. And that's when the teachers are all doing cool things in their rooms that the kids can walk around and see what's going on. I once had an educator walk through and tell me in a very sort of snooty way that it looked like a preschool for big kids. And I thought, yes, that's it exactly. It's this place where they can be creative and curious and they can go see what's going on. And then in the afternoon, we have another block called project time, and that's to give the kids the time and support to work on their own individual projects. And then for kids who, we do have a lot of kids who can't read for various disabilities or, they've been circling that elementary math drain their whole career, and they do want to learn how to do traditional math, or they do want to learn how to read, or maybe sometimes our kids that come in, once they start 8th grade, they start to think about, well, how am I going to be successful in high school? So when they ask for that kind of support, then we'll give them support. We can do math and literacy coaching. We have a teacher who does life skills class that teaches them how to move into a high school if that's what they want to do. But it's all about what the kids want to do. So there's no control and compliance from the teachers. We're there as mentors and supporters. And we let the kids be free to explore what it is they're interested in learning. And it's kind of interesting because we are WASC accredited, which is the Western Association of Schools and Colleges, and they require that you do annual testing in math and literacy. And so we explained to the kids why we had to do it, and we gave them a chance to opt out if they didn't want to do it. They all tested, and we ended up with higher math and literacy scores than the state average, which I thought was very interesting because we don't teach that way. So
we'll be right back after this quick break. During this month of planning and organization for big transitions, rhythms and routines have been absolutely essential for our physical and emotional well-being. So Green Chef nights are reliably and predictably a good night. We know the ingredients will be fresh and prepped, the instructions easy to follow, and the meal delicious. We're all still talking about last week's turkey tacos with mango chimichurri sauce, refried beans, and Monterey Jack cheese. Green Chef contributes to a healthy lifestyle with easy and delicious menus like fresh seasonal salads and grain bowls. And with over 80 weekly meal and market options, plus rotating options to suit a variety of lifestyles, whether Mediterranean, plant-based, calorie-smart, keto, protein-packed, gluten-free, there are always plenty of options to choose from. Whatever you select, you'll get farm-fresh ingredients, organic whole fruits and veggies, and premium proteins, all delivered straight to your door. I love those 4 words. Straight to my door. Oh, and one more thing I love about Green Chef, they have an app, which means it's easy to manage meal preferences and delivery from your phone if you want to. And I, for one, want to. I am in that mode where I'm making the most of little moments like waiting in line at the pharmacy or for the F train to pull into the station to tackle all of those to-dos. So the convenience of an app is key for me. Green Chef has a special offer for Tilt listeners. Go to greenchef.com/tilt50 and use code TILT50 to get 50% off plus 20% off your next 2 months. That's 50% off plus 20% off your next 2 months when you use the code TILT50 at greenchef.com/tilt50. Maybe I've watched too many seasons of The Amazing Race, but every time I have to go somewhere on the subway, I treat it like a competition. It's all about making the right gut decisions about which route will get me there the fastest. Sometimes those decisions get me where I'm going early, and other times my gambles don't really pay off. Probiotics can't help with most gut decisions, but if your gut needs a little support, Ritual has your back. Their Synbiotic Plus, a 3-in-1 supplement, has clinically studied prebiotics, probiotics, and a postbiotic to support a balanced gut microbiome. I've been using Synbiotic Plus for about 6 months now, and it's become a core part of my morning routine. I take the mini capsule every morning while making my way through my inbox, whether I'm at home or I'm on the road, because it doesn't need to be refrigerated. And the capsule itself is delayed released, which helps it survive the harsh conditions of the upper GI tract for delivery to the colon, and that's exactly where we want it to go. Ritual invested in a study modeling the human colon, which showed that Synbiotic Plus significantly increased microbial diversity and the growth of beneficial bacteria. There's no more shame in your gut game. Synbiotic Plus and Ritual are here to celebrate, not hide your insides. Get 25% off your first month for limited time at ritual.com/tilt. Start Ritual or add Synbiotic Plus to your subscription today. That's ritual.com/tilt for 25% off. That's such a cool model. I kind of want to just hang out there. I imagine it's a very creative and I got a really good picture of the vibe there. It feels like a kind of place that these kids would just feel very much at home in.
Yeah. And for a lot of our kids, that's their first experience of having kids who are their true peers. So people that get their humor and are interested in the things they're interested in. And, because a lot of our kids have never had the chance to have a friend, they've not really been able to develop those pro-social skills that they're going to need for adulthood. So there's a big focus on, helping them to be successful socially. Like we teach them how their brain works and, what a pro-social skill is and how their amygdala gets overexcited and, all sorts of things like that help them learn how to be emotionally regulated and cooperative and collaborative with other people and how to have a friend and maintain friendships. Like those things are really important too.
Yeah, that was actually one of my questions, because the social and emotional lives of these kids it's just something that comes up all the time. And I hear from parents, it's something that I think about, how these kids who are maybe so asynchronous, and so they're just not operating or interested in the same thing as their same age peers often. Mm-hmm. And so I was wondering what that actually looks like. Is the environment there, like, do the kids really find each other? Does it seem to create that atmosphere where they really do feel like they're in a community of like-minded, or at least other kids who accept who they are?
Yeah, they do. So that's another big focus, is part of being an attachment community, is we really teach them about what their abilities and their disabilities are. And we help them to be thoughtful and caring about everybody. So for example, you might have a child who's having a meltdown and they're crying because they couldn't figure out how to do something. In another school, they might be made fun of if they're a fifth or sixth grader who's crying because their Lego construction didn't come together the way they wanted it to. But, in our community, that we understand that everybody has those moments where you're emotionally dysregulated and go into fight, flight, or freeze. We really try hard to teach them about Mona Delhook's work, or based on the polyvagal theory by Stephen Porges, about what happens when they go into that mode and how to self-soothe and bring themselves back. And so when they understand all those kinds of things at a deeper level, they're not going to make fun of each other and they're not going to bully each other. I mean, that's not to say that if we have a kid come in who's been bullied their whole life and then suddenly they're somewhere where they're not being bullied. Sometimes they do try out bullying because that's what they've been exposed to. So they're mirroring it in our community. And we just love them through it and help them understand that that's not how they're going to achieve what they really want to achieve. And we don't condemn them or make them feel like they're a bad person because they tried this experience. We just help them see what works and what doesn't work. So, that's kind of like the whole discipline model there is around, it's kind of based on Ross Green's work. We call it the empathy channel, but you're going to approach any situation with curiosity, like, how can I help? What do you need? What sort of support do you need? What's going on? And it's not a punitive. It's more of what thing is happening to you right now that you need support with so that we can help you get regulated again. And when kids know that they're treated that way, a lot of the kinds of problems you get in schools go away, because this school is actually designed to meet them where they're at, and not to try to change them, but to celebrate who they are. And they do feel like they've found their people. In fact, I literally had a kid who came for Shadow Week that said, "Oh my gosh, I've found my people." That was the exact words he used. And so, they find kids who do share those intense passions about, I have a kid who makes these amazing puzzle boxes and he found some other kid who loves that. And there's another kid who loves World War II and he found another kid who loves that, so they are more likely to find somebody who shares those deep interests and passions and can think at that very high intellectual level in a way that's gratifying to them. You can imagine if you have this adult intellect and you're sitting in a third grade classroom day after day, or even in a kindergarten classroom, and you say you want to play, somebody says, "Oh, let's play dinosaurs," and you're all excited and you go start expounding your dictionary of dinosaurs, and they all look at you like you're weird and run away. I mean, that's what most of our kids have been through until they get to a place where they're with true peers.
Yeah. So I have to just ask you, because this is this is the big conversation, right? How do we support kids who don't have access to a big minds, to a Bridges, and there are so many kids in this situation, and we know that 2E kids are probably the trickiest of to really support in a traditional setting. So do you have ideas, I'm sure you do, about
Yes.
things that teachers who are working in a more traditional model, things that they can do to support their 2E students?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I I wrote a whole series in 2E News about how to build a school that works for 2E children. But it's harder to get teachers to step outside the box because they have so much pressure to adhere to the system and to, be in that compliance model. But really, most good teachers, when they close the door, they do what their kids need rather than what the system is telling them to do, that more bureaucratic approach. So I will say, if you're that kind of teacher that can close the door and give our kids what they need, the number one thing is they should never have to do rote practice on something they've already mastered. So the teacher, if you've got a child who is already way past your math level, they should just be able to test out and then go do something they're interested in during that time. And I know teachers balk a lot at this, but I'm like, why? Your job is to teach, let's say you've got a fifth grader. Your job is to teach them fifth grade math. If they can take the end of the year math assessment and demonstrate to you that they already know fifth grade math, why would you make them go through it again? Because, that's Dr. Gross's work about exceptionally and profoundly gifted kids. She said they waste like 70 to 80% of their time in the classroom doing things they already know how to do. So right there is a recipe for underachievement and disengagement. Mm-hmm. And then I think the second thing is to build a community in your classroom where everybody's quirks and foibles are understood and accepted, and everybody's strengths are celebrated, no matter how divergent they are. I think that the teachers can really set the tone. You are the authority in the room. And so you have the capacity, whether or not, to make this kid's life miserable. And, it takes a person who's pretty emotionally regulated themselves, because 2E kids and neurodivergent kids can be difficult if you don't understand how to work with them. So, really educate yourself on what these children need, because when you support them in the way they need to be supported, they are so delightful. I mean, it's like having such an interesting person in the room to talk about, that they have perspectives about life that you may not get from anybody else. I think every adult over 40 should have a child mentor to keep them introduced to that freshness in life. So those are the two main things: to just build that bond with your students, to really build a caring community, to really see the strengths and wonder and lovely things about each of the kids in your classroom, to let them test out of what they already know, not make them do rote practice homework. If you have a homework sheet of 20 problems, can they just do the 5 hardest problems to demonstrate their knowledge? Because that's the thing that kills our kids the most, is just having to do the same thing over and over again that they already know how to do, when their mind is craving novel and new concepts.
Yeah. Or just not seeing the purpose in something when they're like, but I already know this. Yeah. I mean, kills love of learning.
For everybody, not just kids. Like, imagine if you had to be, sitting in a classroom for 6 hours a day doing something you already know how to do. And I get that it's hard, because there is grade levels, and the kids are supposed to learn this at each grade level, which most of that is so arbitrary anyway, and there's so much repetition anyway. So, and people are afraid of letting kids have freedom, but if you let them work on something they're passionate about, I'll tell you a little story. There was a teacher that I was working with who had a very exceptionally gifted child in her classroom, and he could test out of everything, basically. Like, every subject she was teaching in class, he already knew how to do. And he became very disruptive and was kind of making her life very difficult. And so we talked, and I asked her what he was passionate about. And she said, well, all he wants to do is just draw fish. He wants to make this sort of Audubon book with hand-colored watercolor illustrations of the fish of California. And he wants to be an ichthyologist. And, I just don't see how I can let him do that all day, because, it's my job to give him this well-rounded education. And I said, but he already has the well-rounded education. He already knows everything you're supposed to teach this year. Why don't you let him create this wonderful book? So to her credit, she did. She let him test out of every unit. So she had proof that he was doing, and he understood that he needed to take the test to prove that he knew the stuff, because that's what our system requires, right? And then he spent his year making this absolutely exquisite book about the fish of California. I mean, I think it could have been published. It was so beautiful, because he did both the illustrations and the research about it. And he was never another problem in the classroom because he was engaged. He liked his friends. He liked the teacher. He liked going to school. He was just bored out of his mind. So when she gave him this project, he spent his days doing that. And the other kids sometimes gave a little pushback, but she she explained to the rest of the class that sometimes fare isn't equal, that what one person needs looks different than what another person needs. And I think that's possible for our kids. I just think it takes a really enlightened teacher to do it.
I love that story. And it makes me think, too, that these are things that parents who are advocating for their students in a 504 meeting or an IEP meeting could ask for specifically.
Yeah.
Can my child test out of this? Can we get rid of the 50 math problems every night that just kills, our evening enjoyment or time for personal projects? Any other special accommodations that parents could push for?
I think, and I will be radical here, and hopefully this won't be too shocking to your audience, but, parents have a lot more power in the school system than the school system wants you to know that you do. So you can say, in elementary especially, my child won't be doing homework. There's no research that proves that homework is useful for an elementary child. This is our family time, and I'd be happy to write a note telling you whatever enrichment activities we did in lieu of homework. So that's one thing you can do. You can just flat out refuse to do it, or you can ask, can they demonstrate mastery on the 5 hardest problems, those kinds of things. But really, for 2E kids that wrote homework, they've already endured so much during the school day. And for our kids, a lot of times they feel overwhelmed just trying to deal with the sensory and the social and, all the other deeper emotional issues and physical sensory issues at school, that then to come home and have to do more of this rote practice, which is already devastating for them. It's no wonder our kids rebel. And I want to say that I actually think the rebelling is a good thing. I think too often we as adults buy into, but this is what school is. This is what you have to do. You have to do these things to be successful in school. And once you're successful in school, then you go on to college, you'll be successful there, and then you'll have a successful life. That's not true for many of our kids. And so I think you as a parent, you have to really be an advocate for your child for who they are. So, I encourage you to step back away from all the societal pressures of what you should do for school. And I know you talk about this in Differently Wired too, and I totally applaud it. They need to look at their kids and say, what does my kid need? What would really keep my kid engaged and excited and working towards this thing that's going to be a vocation in their life, rather than how am I going to make them be successful in school? And I do say that with a recognition that for many people, you're a single parent, or, you're in a socioeconomic situation where you cannot homeschool your kid. I get that. But then you can just be an absolute I don't want to say no compromise because that sounds right, but you need to be the person who has your kids back, and you go in and say, this is what my kid needs to be successful, and I will work with you to a point, but then there's a point where I'm going to say, no, that's going to be damaging to my child, and I won't be complicit. It's a radical way of looking at educating and trying to change the system, because if you think about it, the system is designed for kids who are neurotypical. And so we're asking our kids to go into a system that absolutely doesn't work for them. And we tell them that you have to match the system, then they end up feeling broken. So how much better is it to say, the system's not designed for you. Let's see if we can tweak it in ways that makes it work for you. Then the message for your child is you're not broken. You're just trying to make do with a system that doesn't really work for you. And I'm here to help you make that happen.
Yeah, fantastic. And I completely agree with everything you shared. And what popped up for me is this idea, which I talk a lot about, which is questioning everything. And I'll just say that as my son's gotten older, it feels almost radical to be, when he says he doesn't agree with an assignment or he doesn't know why he needs to fill this form out a certain way, I'll be like, so do it your way and write down, explain why you did it that way. I've stopped trying to, because when you're doing, I used to always try to get him to just comply because that's quote unquote what we need to do. And when you start empowering them to actually that's probably not true. So if you feel strongly about that, then go ahead and write that down and talk to them about it and see what you can figure out. And then it's kind of handing the reins over to them to be their own best advocates.
Right, because what you're teaching them is to not accept an unjust system. Because really, if you're talking about a movement towards an oppressed group of people, which I know for a lot of people that sounds sort of extreme, but our kids are oppressed. I mean, look at all the news of children who are being, locked in rooms and held in restraints and, things because the adults in the room don't know how to be emotionally regulated adults in the room. I just feel like we need to teach our children from a young age how to stand up for themselves. And that's really important. I was in an IEP the other day for a high school student who was, he was in the IEP and he was saying, I'll do what is needed. I really want to have this high school experience. And they were scolding him for being late to class. And this is a kid who has a health problem where he needs to use the bathroom pretty often. And he said, well, I have a hard time going to the bathroom and making it to class on time. Is there a way you guys can recognize, can I have a hall pass that's something about my health issues? And they said, no, you have a responsibility to get to class within 5 minutes. And he said, well, I think that's inhumane. And I thought, you go, man, you tell them that is inhumane to say to someone who has a health problem, you can't go to the toilet when you need to for as long as you need to.
Absolutely.
We'll be right back after this quick break. Hey there, it's Debbie. I love making this show and sharing conversations about how to support our awesome neurodivergent kids. I've seen how even one little insight from an interview can spark a big shift in daily life. But I know that raising complex kids can be messy and lonely. And just when we think we figured it out, something comes up that boots us right back to feeling overwhelmed and stuck. That's why I've poured everything into creating a way for parents like us navigating complex parenting journeys to join together and chart a path that feels positive, hopeful, and doable. It's the brand new Differently Wired Club experience. In the club, you'll get personal support from me and other seasoned parent coaches, 6 live calls every month where you can connect and get your personal questions answered, the opportunity to learn directly from authors and experts like I have on this show, monthly themes for getting specific and tactical, an exclusive private podcast feed, and the best, most generous community of parents. Seriously, these folks show up for themselves and each other, and that right there is really everything. Because it's a daily reminder that we're not alone. Our kids aren't broken, and we have totally got this. The recently rebooted Differently Wired Club is on a brand new platform with its very own iOS and Android app. It is such a great space. However you learn, whatever your style, no matter the ages, genders, and neurodivergent profile of your children, the Differently Wired Club can help you cultivate the positive shifts you're hoping for. Join us today by going to tiltparenting.com/club. That's tiltparenting.com/club. I hope to see you on the inside.
If you like this show, there's a decent chance you'll also enjoy the Shameless Mom Academy. Hi, I'm Sarah Dean, the founder and host of the Shameless Mom Academy. The Shameless Mom Academy is a podcast for moms that centers moms more than it centers your kids. I'm not going to teach you how to make baby food or how to make your 3-year-old or 13-year-old stop having tantrums. Instead, I'm going to bring you back to yourself. For the last 20 years, I've been helping moms through growth and transformation. Inside the Shameless Mom Academy, I help you identify who you are and who you are becoming. Look, motherhood is hard. It brought me to my knees many times and sometimes still does. Returning to who I am and who I am becoming allows me to decide how to show up in all those sticky motherhood moments, but also in all my other relationships and in all the ways I show up in my various communities. So come check out the Shameless Mom Academy wherever you listen to podcasts. I'm willing to bet you'll leave feeling a little inspired and maybe even completely fired up. And you'll probably laugh a few times because I promise we never take ourselves too seriously over here. With 700 episodes to choose from, you're likely going to find something that sparks and speaks to you inside the Shameless Mom Academy.
So that leads me to my next and last question, actually. I just want to know what your thoughts are on how we can help people who don't get it to get it. And in fact, that's counter to what I tell a lot of my listeners, if they've got friends who don't really understand, and no matter what's going on with our kids, that it's not our job to convince them. However, I feel like with gifted and 2E kids, there is so much misunderstanding. so many people just aren't even aware of who these kids are. Their differences are invisible. They think we're being indulgent. They think, there's just a whole plethora of myths and beliefs out there. And so I'm just wondering what thoughts you have about how can we, whether they're professionals, other parents, help them better see our kids and recognize why they need what they need.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I mean, I feel like we shouldn't have to defend ourselves and explain ourselves. But on the other hand, if we don't, we're never going to broadly help, people understand. So a lot of the work I do is to educate professionals, because I feel like if I can get them to understand, then they can go out and touch so many more lives. And kind of the approach I do is first off, I want them to understand the sensory piece for our kids. I want them to understand the emotional dysregulation piece. I want them to understand the social piece. And also I want them to understand how othering it feels to be so much smarter than everybody else in the room. And I know people cringe at that. They really have a hard time with the gifted piece and the, that it's sort of like we're trying to say that our kids are so much better. But if we don't acknowledge that they have these extremely high intellects and they're being asked to rein it in, so you've got this racehorse that's locked in a stall all the time. That is so damaging to who they are as a human being and what their potential is. So I think it's really important to try to help people understand, first and foremost, really how smart our kids are. Secondly, how a lot of them, the sensory and anxiety piece seems to be sort of hardwired into that extreme intellect. And so they're also coping with that. And then not being able to have friends in a way that they have a chance to develop those close friendship ties and work through the hard parts of friendship that give you a chance to develop the pro-social skills you'll need to be an adult in the world. If you don't get the other people to understand that's what your basic needs are and be willing to accommodate you and work with you in a way that helps you be successful, then you really are a minority who deals with these sort of aggressions every day of your life.
That's great. Great food for thought. Great answer. And so glad that you are an advocate for our kids in doing this work, and that you took what you needed and you created it to benefit not only your family, but others as well. So can you, before we say goodbye, just take a few minutes to tell listeners where they can learn more about you and your school?
Sure. I wrote a book called We Tried Normal. It's free on Medium. I think you could just Google Medium, We Tried Normal. And I think for someone who has never been exposed to anything about twice exceptionality, it's a really good primer. It's made up of sort of 10 chapters of stories of families. They're actually families I worked with over the last 20 years. I've made fake families so to protect privacy, but the quotes are verbatim and the situations are real. So I think for someone who has no exposure to what it's like to try to raise a 2E child, that's a resource. Also, they can Google bigminds.org, bigmindsunschool.org to find out more about Big Minds. I'm at drhayes2e.org. There's a website that has my blog. But I think also, I feel like you're sort of a ground zero to find out more about twice exceptionality and neurodivergent people, because you've had so many people on that can give in a brief podcast such a deep knowledge about 2E people in a way that's very accessible to lots of people. So I would encourage people to go through your list and listen to what you have to say on your podcast, because I think you've got it right. And you've really brought in people who truly understand how to help these kids thrive. And I just think, it's my life's work. I'm sure it's your life's work. There's a lot of us out there that have been trying so hard to make a difference. And finally, I feel like there's starting to be a connection. When I started 20 years ago, I felt like I was the only person swimming upstream. But over the years and through connections like this, you start to realize there's a bunch of us that are creating this web. And pretty soon the web is going to change the way we deal with our kids. And when that happens, they're going to bring their full force of potential into the world and maybe solve some of the problems that have needed to be solved for so long.
Yes to that. So listeners, I will leave links to all of the resources that Melanie just mentioned, including We Tried Normal, her book, on the show notes page. And also, thanks for the shout out for my podcast. I do actually, for listeners who are newer, if you go to the main podcast page there at the top, you can click on a number of themes. And there is a theme just for 2E. If you click that, you will just instantly be taken to a page where all of the interviews I've done that specifically focus on twice exceptionality live there. So you don't have to dig through 180 some episodes to find them. So I just want to thank you again. I'm so glad that we were able to connect in real life and that you could share your work with us. And I look forward to more conversations with you.
Absolutely. It's been such a pleasure. And again, keep doing the great work you're doing. It's helping people around the world.
You've been listening to the Tilt Parenting Podcast. For the show notes for this episode, where you can download the transcript, find a link to Melanie's school, and all the other resources we discussed, visit tiltparenting.com/session190. If you want to be a part of Tilt Parenting and get my short weekly emails where I share resources, relevant news articles, and personal messages from me, as well as be notified when the doors for the Differently Wired Club open up, you can sign up on tiltparenting.com. Lastly, please take a few minutes to leave a rating or a review or both for Tilt Parenting on iTunes if you haven't done so already. Ratings and reviews help keep this podcast visible in an ever-growing sea of podcasts. Thank you so much for considering. And that's all for this week. For more on Tilt Parenting, visit www.tiltparenting.com.
Are you overwhelmed by the things that get in the way of you doing what you want to do? Are you looking for ways to simplify life to better align with your values? Do you want to create space in your schedule so you have room for more of the good stuff? Play, joy, relationships, gratitude, and more? If you answered yes to any of these questions, I invite you to check out Edit Your Life, a podcast to help you edit the unnecessary from your life so you have more room to enjoy the awesome. Through episodes with me, Christine Coe, and a range of super smart, compassionate, and thoughtful guests, you'll come away with big picture insights and practical ways to declutter your home, schedule, and mental space without getting bogged down by perfection. I have always believed that small moments and actions matter tremendously. My goal is to help you find agency and space in your life through doable baby steps that will leave you feeling accomplished instead of overwhelmed. Check out Edit Your Life wherever you enjoy your podcasts.